I should probably admit something before I tell you the rest. When Maryanne Hart knocked on my door that morning, my first instinct wasn't excitement, it was fear. Because when someone shows up at your porch at 6:47 a.m., rain dripping from their hair and a suitcase sitting at their feet, you understand something immediately. This isn't a casual visit. This is someone we're running from something. And the strange part? I'm the one who invited her. Well, kind of. The night before, standing in her enormous penthouse apartment while rain slammed against 12 floors of glass, I made a stupid joke. One of those jokes people make when they're uncomfortable with silence. If this place ever feels too big, I told her while tightening a pipe behind her couch, you could always crash at my place. I laughed right after. You know, the awkward kind of laugh that says, I didn't really mean that. But she didn't laugh. Maryanne just looked at me, not in a flirtatious way, not in a confused way either, more like she was saving the sentence somewhere important. I didn't think about it again, at least not until the next morning, because there she was, standing on my porch, suitcase beside her, eyes tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Is your offer still good? She asked quietly. For a few seconds, I honestly forgot how to speak. You have to understand something about my life back then. My name's Ethan Myers. I was 24. Living alone in my grandfather's old house on the edge of the South Town, Connecticut. The place creaked when you walked. The paint peeled in places, and the kitchen light flickered every time it turned on. But it was mine.
Quiet.
Predictable. Safe. And suddenly there was a woman on my porch who looked like she had just walked away from an entirely different life. I stepped aside without thinking. Come in, I said. And that was the exact moment my quiet life started changing. I just didn't realize how much in yet, because the first strange thing Maryanne Hart did after entering my house was look around like she had been there before. I didn't notice it right away, but Maryanne didn't walk into my house like a guest. She stepped inside slowly, rolling her suitcase across the old wooden floor like she was testing the weight of the place. Her eyes moved over everything. The crooked hallway shelf, the dent in the couch cushion, the stack of unopened mail on the counter. Most people would have looked uncomfortable. Embarrassed, maybe. She didn't. She looked curious, like someone studying a quiet life they had never seen before. I suddenly became very aware that I was barefoot, wearing yesterday's t-shirt, and holding the door like I had no idea what to do next. You don't have to decide right now, she said softly. That surprised me. Decide what? If you want me here? She said it calmly, but her hand tightened slightly around the handle of the suitcase, like she had already prepared herself to turn around. I shook my head. No, I just wasn't expecting you. That earned the smallest smile. Neither was I. For a moment, neither of us moved. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof behind us, and the house smelled faintly like coffee grounds and old wood. Finally, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. 3 weeks, she said, placing it carefully on the kitchen counter. Cash. I stared at it like it might explode. You don't have to. I know. She didn't push it closer. But she didn't take it back either. I just need somewhere quiet, she added. That word stuck with me.
Quiet.
Because the truth is, that house had been quiet for a long time. Too quiet. I rubbed the back of my neck. The guest room's down the hall, I said finally. It's basic. She nodded once, picked up the suitcase and walked past me. The floorboards creaked loudly under her steps. When the door to the guest room clicked shut, the house went still again. But it didn't feel the same. It felt like the walls were waiting. Like something important had just moved in. And the strange part? For the first time in years, my house didn't feel empty. The first few days after Maryanne moved in were strangely quiet. Not the empty kind of quiet I was used to. A different kind. The kind where you're always aware that someone else is breathing somewhere down the hall. I left early every morning for work. Usually before the sun finished climbing over the trees. Fixing pipes around Southtown meant long days. Crawling under sinks and standing in damp basements. But every evening when I came home, something small had changed. The first night it was the kitchen sink, spotless, not just rinsed, scrubbed. The second night the pile of unopened bills on my counter had been stacked neatly with a rubber band around them. The third night, there was food on the stove, chicken and rice, covered carefully with foil. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. No note, no explanation, just dinner. And the strange thing? It was good, really good. I knocked on her door after eating. There was a pause before it opened slightly, just enough for her to look out. Her hair was loose now, falling around her shoulders instead of pulled back like the night I met her. You cooked, I asked. She nodded once. I made too much. Something about the way she said it felt careful, like she wasn't used to doing things for someone else anymore. You didn't have to, I told her. I know. Her voice softened slightly. It helps me think. That answer confused me, but I didn't press. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and noticed something else. She was wearing my flannel shirt, one of the old red ones I kept in the laundry room. The shirt looks better on you, I said without thinking. She looked down at it, cheeks turning faintly pink. It was in the dryer. You can keep it. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she gave this quiet little smile that almost felt surprised. Good night, Ethan. When the door closed, I stood there longer than I meant to. Because for the first time since she arrived, I heard something through the wall. Maryanne was humming. Soft, careful, like someone testing whether they still remembered how. The first time I heard Maryanne sing, I almost thought I imagined it. It was late, one of those quiet October nights where the house creaks every time. The wind moves through the trees. I was lying on the couch pretending to watch an old rerun on TV when the sound drifted through the hallway wall. Soft, barely louder than breathing. At first it was just humming, then slowly, words. I didn't recognize the song, but her voice was careful, like someone touching something fragile after years of avoiding it. And for some reason I didn't move, didn't cough, didn't change the channel. I just stayed there listening, because the strange thing was, she sounded happy. Not the confident, sharp woman I'd met in that penthouse. This was different, lighter, almost younger. The next morning I didn't mention it. I figured she'd probably be embarrassed. But that evening when I walked into the kitchen, the smell of garlic and rosemary filled the whole house. Maryanne stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring something in my grandmother's old cast-iron skillet. She didn't turn around when I came in. Hope you're hungry, she said. I made too much again. I leaned against the counter. You sing. Her hand froze mid-stir. What? When you think no one's listening. For a second she just stared at the pan. Then she laughed, soft and surprised. I haven't sung in years. Well, you're good. She glanced over her shoulder at me. You're not supposed to hear that. Thin walls. That made her smile again. We ate dinner at the small kitchen table that night. Real plates. The good napkins my grandfather used to save for holidays. Conversation came slowly at first, but it didn't feel awkward. After dinner, she washed the dishes and I dried. At one point, our hands brushed reaching for the same plate. Neither of us moved right away. Just a second, maybe two. Then she quietly said something that made my chest tighten. I forgot what it feels like to eat in a place that sounds like a home. And suddenly I realized something strange. Maryanne Hart wasn't just hiding in my house. She was learning how to live in it. By the second week, the house started feeling different. Not louder, just warmer. The kind of warmth that sneaks in slowly until one day, you realize you're not rushing out the door anymore. One evening I came home to find Maryanne sitting on the living room floor with my toolbox open. Her hair was tied back with one of my old bandanas. And the crooked shelf in the hallway, the one that had leaned sideways for 3 years, was finally straight. You didn't have to do that, I said. She tightened the last screw and leaned back to study her work. It was bothering me. I crossed my arms. You're pretty good with tools for someone who lives in a penthouse. That made her pause. For a moment I thought maybe I'd said something wrong. Then she wiped her hands on her jeans. I used to build furniture, she said quietly. Before boardrooms. That answer stuck with me longer than it should have, because until that moment, I realized I didn't actually know who Maryanne Hart was. I knew the expensive suit, the penthouse, the tired look in her eyes, but not the person behind it. Later that night, we sat on the porch watching the river move through the dark. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since the morning she arrived. Why here? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Why not a hotel? I added. Or a friend? Maryanne rested her elbows on her knees, staring out at the water. The porch light buzzed softly above us. Because you didn't ask who I used to be. Her voice was calm. But everyone else always does. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? She turned to look at me then. Really look. You just fixed the pipe. That was it. No dramatic explanation. No long story. Just that. And somehow that answer made the night feel heavier. Because suddenly I realized something I hadn't before. Maryanne didn't come to my house because it was safe. She came because it was the one place where she didn't have to explain herself. Somewhere during the third week, the house stopped feeling like it belonged to just me. It wasn't something we talked about. It just happened. I stopped sleeping on the couch one night after a long job fixing a flooded basement downtown. I was too tired to think about what was polite or careful. I just fell asleep in my own bed. When I woke up the next morning, Maryanne was already in the kitchen, barefoot, hair tied loosely, wearing another one of my flannel shirts. She looked up from the stove like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Coffee's strong," she warned. "I'm used to that." We stood there quietly for a moment, both holding our mugs. The kitchen window was fogged from the cold outside, and the radiator hissed like it always did in the mornings. "You snore a little," she said suddenly. I blinked. "You were listening?" "The walls are thin." There was the smallest smile on her face. I shook my head. "Great, my reputation's ruined." She laughed softly, and something about that sound made the room feel smaller. In a good way. Later that evening, we walked down to the river. It had become a quiet habit. Neither of us called it a routine, but we both knew when it was time. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke from chimneys around town. Maryanne sat on the old bench near the water, pulling my hoodie tighter around her shoulders. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Sometimes." "And?" I shrugged. Then I remember everything I'd miss. She watched the river move under the bridge for a long moment. "I used to run here every morning," she said quietly, "trying to outrun my life." I looked at her. "And now?" Maryanne leaned slightly closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine. Now I'm standing still. For a second, neither of us moved. Then our fingers touched on the bench between us, not by accident, but not exactly on purpose either. And the strange thing was, neither of us pulled away. By the time December arrived, people in Southtown had started to notice. It's a small town. When a woman who used to live in the glass tower downtown suddenly starts walking to the river in oversized hoodies. People talk. Mrs. Gladys from across the street stopped me one afternoon while I was loading tools into my truck. "That the new girlfriend?" she asked, nodding toward my house. I opened my mouth to correct her, then stopped. Because the truth was, I didn't know what Maryanne was. She wasn't just a guest anymore. But we had never said the word "our relationship" either. So I just shrugged. Mrs. Gladys smiled like she already had her answer. Inside the house, things had settled into something that felt strangely natural. Her toothbrush sat next to mine in the bathroom. Her coat hung beside my old work jacket. Sometimes she cooked. Sometimes we ordered cheap takeout and watched terrible movies on my busted DVD player. We still hadn't kissed. Not once. But sometimes when we sat on the couch, our knees touched. And neither of us moved them away. And somehow that felt bigger than a kiss. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. I came home earlier than usual and heard Maryanne's voice in the living room. Sharp. Tense. I froze in the hallway. I said, "I'm not coming back." She snapped into the phone. There was a pause. Then she laughed bitterly. "No, you don't get to decide that for me anymore." More silence. Her voice dropped. "Quiet now. Dangerously calm. You had 10 years to notice I was unhappy." Another pause. Then 3 words that made my stomach tighten. "I'll think about it." When she hung up, the house went completely still. I stepped into the living room. Maryanne was standing by the window, staring out toward the river. "They want me back," she said quietly. I felt something twist inside my chest. Back meant the penthouse, the job, the life she'd walked away from. "What do you want?" I asked. She didn't answer, not right away. Instead, she looked around the house slowly. The couch, the crooked shelf she fixed, the kitchen table where we ate every night. Then she said something that scared me more than if she'd just packed her bags. "They're giving me 48 hours to decide." That night, neither of us slept much. Not that we said that out loud, but I could hear her moving around the house long after midnight. Soft footsteps in the hallway, the quiet creak of the kitchen cabinet, water running in the sink, little sounds that felt heavier than they should have. I stayed in my room staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about what the house would feel like if she left. Because the truth was, I already knew. It would feel exactly like it used to. Empty. And that thought scared me more than I wanted to admit. Around 1 in the morning, I finally walked into the kitchen. Maryanne was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, staring at nothing. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked tired. Not physically, the kind of tired that lives deeper than sleep. "You should try to rest," I said. She smiled faintly. "You ever notice how people only say that when rest is impossible?" I pulled out the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed quietly behind us. Finally, she looked up. "They offered me everything today." I already knew what that meant. "The penthouse?" I asked. She nodded. "And more money than I thought possible." "Sounds tempting." She studied my face carefully like she was searching for something. "You're not going to try to convince me to stay?" The question caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the words came out different than I expected. I don't want you to feel trapped here. Her expression changed slightly, something softer. You never trapped me. The way she said it made my chest tighten. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Do you know what the strangest part is? She said quietly. What? I should want that life back. She looked around the kitchen slowly. The scratched table, the flickering light, the old radiator hissing in the corner. Then her eyes landed on me. But this place feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. And suddenly the choice in front of her didn't feel like a career decision anymore. It felt like something much bigger. She left before the sun came up. I didn't hear the door. Didn't hear the car either. The only reason I knew she was gone was the silence. The house had gone back to that old, hollow quiet I remembered too well. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. Her mug was gone from the counter. Her coat hook by the door was empty. The air even smelled different, less like coffee and soap, more like dust. For a moment I just stood there, staring at the table like my brain was still catching up. Then I noticed the folded piece of paper. My name was written across the front. I didn't open it right away. Something about it felt fragile, like once I read it, something permanent would settle into place. Finally, I unfolded it. The note was short. She had taken the early train to the city. The meeting was at 9. She didn't know what she was going to say yet. But there was one line at the bottom that stuck with me longer than the rest. Thank you for the porch light. That was it. No promises. No explanations. Just that. The whole day passed like a blur after that. I fixed a leaking boiler in a basement that smelled like mold. Replaced a faucet for a couple who argued the entire time I was there. Drove around town with the radio off because even music felt like too much. Every quiet moment reminded me of her. The way she hummed while cooking. The way she lined plates perfectly before dinner. The way she wore my flannel like it belonged to her. By the time I got home, the sky was already dark. The porch light was still on. I sat on the steps for a long time, not really thinking, just waiting. For what, I didn't know. Hours passed. Then, sometime after midnight, headlights swept slowly across the driveway. A silver car rolled in. The engine shut off. The door opened. Maryanne stepped out barefoot, holding her heels in one hand. Her hair was loose and wild from the wind. She looked exhausted. But when she saw me sitting on the porch, she smiled, and the first thing she said made my heart start pounding. I didn't go to the meeting. For a second, I just stared at her. The porch light buzzed softly above us, and the river down the hill rushed louder than usual from the winter rain. You didn't go? I repeated. Maryanne shook her head slowly. The silver car behind her ticked quietly as the engine cooled. They offered me everything, she said. Corner office, more money, a driver. She gave a small laugh, but it cracked halfway through. And you said no? She walked a few steps closer, her bare feet brushing the cold wood of the porch. I drove there, she admitted. Sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes. I didn't interrupt. I kept thinking about that apartment, she continued. How quiet it was. How every room echoed. Her eyes lifted to meet mine. Then I thought about this house. The crooked porch rail, the kitchen light that flickers, the way the radiator hisses every morning. And you. Something inside my chest tightened. I realized something down there in that garage, she said softly. What's that? She held up a small piece of metal, my spare key, the one I had handed her weeks ago without thinking about it. I wasn't running away when I came here. She stepped closer now, close enough that I could see the rain still clinging to the ends of her hair. I was running toward something. My throat felt tight. You sure about that? I asked quietly. Maryanne nodded. I've never been more sure about anything. For a moment we just stood there in the cold night air. Then she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around me. Not carefully, not hesitantly, fully, like someone who had finally decided where they belonged. I'm not very good at staying, she murmured against my chest. I smiled faintly. Me neither. She pulled back just enough to look up at me. Then I guess we'll learn. And the strange thing is, the life that started with a stupid joke about moving in ended up becoming the first place either of us ever truly called home.